When police responded to reports of a hoarding situation in an 87-year-old woman's home in Florida, they had no idea what they were about to uncover. As they removed tons of garbage from the house, they uncovered a shocking secret that had been hidden for decades. Edith Madison had a happy childhood. She was born and raised in a small town in the Midwest where everyone knew each other. She was the youngest of 3 siblings, and her parents were hard-working farmers who struggled to make ends meet. Despite their struggles, Edith's parents did everything they could to provide for their children. They taught them the value of hard work and instilled a sense of community and belonging. Edith's childhood was filled with laughter, playing with her siblings, and helping out on the farm. Despite the joyful moments that Edith shared with her siblings, she was always more of a quiet person. As a child, she spent most of her time reading books, listening to music, and drawing pictures. Her parents often scolded her for not playing outside like other children her age, but Edith didn't mind. She enjoyed her solitude and found solace in her own thoughts. Edith's parents passed away when she was in her early 20s, leaving her to care for her younger siblings. This was a difficult time for her, as she had to take on a lot of responsibility at a young age. She worked hard to provide for her siblings and ensure they had a stable home. Despite the challenges, Edith never complained. She remained resilient and determined to make the best of the situation. But as Edith grew older, things began to change. Her siblings moved away, and Edith found herself alone in the world with no family or friends nearby. She moved to Florida, hoping to start a new life, but found it hard to connect with people. Edith worked as a waitress for many years, but she never really made any close friends. She was a bit of a loner and mostly kept to herself. She would spend her days off reading books and tending to her small garden. In her 30s, Edith met the love of her life, Henry. They were a match made in heaven, and they quickly fell in love. They were married shortly after and spent the next 50 years together. They were inseparable and did everything together. They enjoyed gardening, reading, and taking long walks in the park. They were each other's best friends and confidants. However, everything changed when Henry passed away. Edith was left alone in the house they had shared for over 50 years. The memories of their life together were too much for her to bear, and she found herself struggling to cope with the loss. She became increasingly isolated. As the years went by, Edith's world became smaller and smaller. She became more and more isolated until she was barely leaving her house at all. She would order groceries online and have them delivered, and she rarely ventured outside. There were new neighbors around her who didn't know much about Edith except that she was a bit odd. They would occasionally see her puttering around in her garden, but they never really got to know her. They assumed that she was just a reclusive old woman who didn't like company. Things would have been the same if it was not for the odor coming from Edith's house. The nearby neighbors were the first to notice, but then the stench seemed to go around the whole area. A few of the neighbors tried to reach out to Edith about it, but she brushed them off. Nobody wanted to be harsh with the old lady and be firm, but the stench was growing every day. The neighbors had been aware of the strange odor coming from Edith's house for a while now. It had been a topic of conversation among them for some time, but no one could quite put their finger on what was causing it. Some thought it might be a gas leak, while others suspected that it was coming from the sewage system. But as the days turned into weeks and the smell only grew worse, they began to suspect that something more sinister was at play. It wasn't until one particularly hot and humid day that the stench became unbearable. One of the neighbors, Mary, decided that enough was enough. She knocked on Edith's door, but when there was no answer, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She peeked through the windows and was shocked at what she saw. The inside of the house was cluttered with piles upon piles of garbage. It was so bad that she could hardly see the floor. Mary immediately called the other neighbors, and they all gathered outside Edith's house. As they stood there trying to figure out their next move, they noticed Edith's car parked in the driveway. That meant that she was home. But where was she? They were unsure what to do next. Should they break down the door and go inside? Should they call the police? Eventually, Mary had no other option but to call the police, and little did she know, her one call would change Edith's life. The police were quick to arrive at the scene and call out for Edith, who gave no reply. They wasted no time and broke in to check what was going on inside the house. What they saw was something they could have never expected. They were shocked to find piles upon piles of garbage stacked up inside. Old newspapers, empty containers, discarded food, and broken appliances filled the house. It was a hoarder's paradise, and it seemed like there was no end to the mess. They saw piles of garbage in every room, and in Edith's own bedroom, she was stockpiling more garbage. The officers who arrived at her house realized that there was more to the situation than just a hoarding problem. Edith was sitting in the corner of the room wailing when the officers saw her. They saw a woman who was struggling with loneliness and grief, and they knew that they needed to help her. But why was Edith hoarding garbage all over her house? As the police officers dug deeper into Edith's past, they discovered that she had always struggled with loneliness. Her husband, whom she had been married to for over 50 years, had passed away a few years ago. They had always done everything together, and now she was alone in that big house, surrounded by memories of a life that was no more. For years after her husband passed away, Edith couldn't bear to let go of anything that reminded her of him. She was left with a void that she didn't know how to fill, and the only thing that brought her any comfort was clinging to the past. So she began to hoard everything, every trinket, every piece of clothing, every old newspaper and magazine. To her, these things were a way to keep her husband's memory alive, to hold on to a time when he was still with her. As the years went on, the hoarding became more and more intense. The woman's home became overrun with garbage, piles of old newspapers and magazines stacked haphazardly against the walls, boxes and boxes of old clothing and toys filling up every inch of space. The smell of decay filled the air, and Edith herself became lost in the chaos. The garbage was a coping mechanism, a way for her to hold on to the past, and keep herself occupied. She couldn't bear to let go of anything that reminded her of her husband, so she hoarded everything. The police officers and neighbors were touched by her story. They realized that there was a human behind the mess, a woman who had lost everything and was struggling to cope with the grief. They decided to reach out to the community, and together, they organized a cleanup effort. They started to clear the garbage out of the house, and as they did, they found something unexpected. Among the piles of garbage were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and other sentimental items. It was as if Edith had been holding on to these things for years, and they were the only things that mattered to her. Every time she picked up an old photo album or a piece of clothing that her husband had worn, it was like he was there with her again. She could almost feel his presence in the room, and it gave her a sense of comfort that she couldn't find anywhere else. As they dug deeper, they found a box of letters from her late husband over 30 years ago. The letters were filled with love, kindness, and appreciation for everything she had done for him. It was clear that these letters were the reason why Edith had been hoarding all of the garbage in her house. The police realized that Edith had been holding on to these items because they were the only things she had left of her beloved husband. They saw the heartbreak in her eyes and knew that she needed help. As the community rallied around her, Edith began to open up. She started to talk to her neighbors and share stories about her life. They discovered that she was a talented artist and had painted beautiful landscapes and portraits throughout her life. Her art was a way for her to express her emotions and cope with her loneliness. The cleanup effort was a turning point for Edith. It was a moment of kindness and compassion that she had never experienced before. She realized that she didn't have to go through life alone and that there were people who cared about her. Through the cleanup effort, Edith found a sense of purpose again. She began to reconnect with the world around her, and slowly but surely, she started to come out of her shell. She realized that she didn't have to hold on to everything to remember her husband, and that memories could live on in other ways. The community came together to clean up Edith's house and make it habitable again. They organized a yard sale to sell off the things that were no longer needed, and all of the proceeds went towards helping Edith live a better life. As the days passed, Edith's house transformed into a clean and welcoming home. The garbage was gone, and the memories of Henry remained. She had learned to let go of the physical items that reminded her of him, and instead focused on the memories that lived on in her heart. Edith is now a very friendly and social woman who you can see regularly chatting with the neighbors and sharing stories of her life with her husband. She had been holding on to the memories for so long that she forgot to live in the present. But with the help of her community, she was able to let go of the past and enjoy the present. The story of Edith is a reminder of the power of community and compassion. It's a reminder that we all have struggles and that sometimes a little help from others can make all the difference. Edith's journey is not an easy one, but she persevered through the loneliness and found a way to move forward with the help of a loving community.